Hi everybody, tonight we're going to continue our discussion of factor markets and talk about the markets for land and capital. In Krugman 69, we learned that labor has a value of marginal product attached to it and that the firm should hire just up to the point where the value of marginal product of labor equals the wage. So again, surprisingly similar to marginal cost equals marginal revenue. The next unit of land or capital employed also has a value of marginal product, so that VMP acronym attached to it, and diminishing returns to production make sure that the value of marginal product for each of those two, so land and capital, the demand curves for those are downward sloping as well. Now, a firm determines how much land and capital to employ in pretty much the same way the firm hires labor. If the value of marginal product of the capital or land, and here I put capital / land, so capital or land, is greater than or equal to the marginal cost of employing that unit of capital or land, then the firm should use /hire /employ that marginal unit. The marginal cost of the next unit is called rent. Now, if you look up here, rather than marginal cost when we were talking about labor, we used wage, which is fine. Here, marginal cost is just the cost of that, again, that marginal unit of capital or land, because you don't attach a wage to capital or land. And here we could have said marginal wage. Really what it is the wage of the marginal worker, that next worker. So again, marginal cost of the next unit of capital or land is referred to as rent. So VMP of land equals rent of land. VMP capital equals rent of capital. So that value of marginal product of land equals rent of land. So you're hiring just up to that point, hiring / purchasing / employing that last unit of land or capital to where they're equal. Keep in mind, rent can be explicit or implicit. Explicit in the case of, let's say, somebody who is renting a piece of equipment. The explicit cost associated with that rental is what I actually pay to rent that piece of equipment for the day. Implicit costs I experience as the owner of that piece of equipment when I rent it out instead of using it. So they're also implicit, has to do with opportunity cost. Now, in the market for land and the market for capital, you can see the differences, the significant differences in the supply curves for those two factor markets. The supply for land is nearly inelastic, largely because land is a finite resource. As we learned back when we were talking about the market for resorts, there's only so much land. So as more land gets used, it does become that supply becomes relatively inelastic, largely because you can't make more land. The market for capital, on the other hand, is flatter because as demand for a piece of capital, so think of it as, for example, a piece of machinery, as demand for that piece of capital increases, suppliers can just create more, or producers can just create more of that particular piece of equipment or machinery. So you can see the difference between, again, the relatively inelastic and the relatively elastic supply curves. Now, similar to the traditional supply and demand curve we've seen, you can actually see shifts in supply when you're talking about factors of production. Here we have an example of a leftward shift in supply for land when farmland is developed. You see here very, very steep supply curve, so good hint that it's the supply curve for land as a factor of production. And here, when farmland is developed, what happens? Well, it's being taken out of production. So the supply of arable land is actually decreasing, and as a result, you see an increase in price as we go from R1 here, so rent 1 to rent 2. So the very last part of the Krugman module talks about the marginal productivity theory. Let's look at just a straight up definition. Marginal productivity theory holds that each factor of production is paid the value of the output generated by the last unit, so the marginal unit, of that factor employed in the factor market. So in other words, the equilibrium value of the marginal product. So what is the equilibrium value of the marginal product? the value of the output generated by the last unit of that factor employed in the factor market. Let's take an example. When the labor market for computer programmers is in equilibrium, the wage rate earned by all computer programmers is equal to the market's equilibrium value of the marginal product. Again, market equilibrium value of the marginal product. Stated another way, the value of the marginal product of the last computer programmer hired in that market. So think again, you are hiring just up to the point where the wage equals the value of the marginal product. Okay, that's it for tonight. Have a great night, and I will talk to you tomorrow.